The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is Anime Thursdays once again on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We're going to be talking news and notes on anime this week after we took last week off for the 4th of July. We've got a lot of news to catch up on over the last couple weeks of anime, so really excited to get a chance to do that. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going. There's a lot of news out there this time around. A lot to get into.
A ton of news, and we're going to get to as much of it as we can over the next 45 minutes. And Chris has joined us in the chat, as always. Appreciate Chris holding down the chat for us.
Absolutely.
Once again. And a lot of interesting anime news over the last few weeks. Some of it good news, some of it maybe not so good news, but we try to cover it all and try to bring a neutral perspective as best we can. It's definitely an interesting time in the anime industry, and because of that, we've got several stories off the top that kind of take you through the full gamut of what's going on in the anime industry. I think the biggest story we're talking about this week was the decision by Crunchyroll to remove comments and forums from their website to basically take those away. I know there were a few reasons given by the company. They had claimed that there were some boys' life shows that maybe were targeted for comments, but they've had those types of shows before, but only suddenly now they've decided to remove the comments. I think the bigger issue was the show My Dear Friend Nokotan, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, because it was a show that, as we've talked about on this podcast, through viral marketing, through this crazy, brain rot song, has got a lot of people excited to check it out when it first came on. And unfortunately, the subtitles were very subpar, as it turned out. Originally, people kind of thought it was AI, but maybe potentially it was actually just done on the cheap by a third-party company.
Hoping it was AI.
Yeah, it's and Chris brings up a good point that a lot of times you see features disappear when your main competition goes away.
Absolutely.
And obviously, them absorbing Funimation made that happen. But that subtitle controversy was really hot, and it wasn't just English. It was several other languages that it was subpar. And it makes you wonder why they're cheaping out on this all of a sudden, if this is going to be a trend, and whether this show in particular was chosen as a test subject. But it was almost, I think it was like the day after all the outrage about this show and its lackluster presentation came out, that all of a sudden Crunchyroll decided to remove all the comments. So it feels like that is the primary reason, even though they want to give other reasons that maybe tug on the heartstrings a little more for people. But it feels like you did a crappy job, people let you know about it, and because of that you didn't want to hear it and you took the comments down. That's my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree completely. To Chris's point, I just don't know if this is the time you need to be removing features when ultimately you're going to be asking people for more money before too long. That's just bound to happen. I think it betrays kind of the whole nature of anime in general, where you look at something like Crunchyroll, who started out as this, piratey type entity and kind of thrived on community. And now we're sitting here in a situation where they've stripped away that community element from their streaming platform. A streaming platform that, depending on what device you're using it on, may or may not even work all that well to begin with. But I think it's easy to use any kind of questionable show that may be getting negative feedback. It's a fun smokescreen. But I also think, even if that were true, that didn't happen on any of these other shows prior. This isn't like the first show like that. And I don't remember there ever being a backlash against any of the others. So if there was this time around, you got to think maybe something was a catalyst to make people want to lash out. And it wasn't just that show in general.
Yeah, I think, they have licensed a pretty broad range of shows and any
For
type.
years.
For years. I think, I don't think that was the driving force behind removing these comments. It's one of those things that's a very convenient excuse because you can't. It becomes hard to defend or hard to argue. Oh, well, I totally understand why you did that. But again, I'm paying good money to Crunchyroll every month. You're paying good money to Crunchyroll every month. You expect some level of quality. And this was a show that I was excited about. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and I've yet to watch the first episode because I'm kind of on the fence as to whether I want to watch it now, because number one, I don't really want to give it views because that just validates their decision to cheap out on it.
Yeah. With no recourse as far as telling them, hey, what you did was terrible.
Right. Because I can't. We can just talk about it on the podcast, but that's it. At the same time, I do kind of want to watch it just to kind of experience it for myself and see like how much does it impact my understanding of what's going on in the show. I mean, I speak some Japanese. I can understand some of it without subtitles, but I still need subtitles for most of it. And if the subtitles are bad, who are you really appealing to by putting out such a substandard product? And they've already supposedly put a dub on it. And we've seen a couple shows like that this season where dubs are coming out almost immediately. And again, you wonder, like, what's the budget for these dubs? I know the my dear friend Okotan, they went with those completely remote dub, which on the one hand is great for as far as, being able to dub anime in different parts of the country. I saw somebody who was from Iowa. That's wonderful. But it's only really wonderful if you're not then cheaping out by saying, oh, well, you're from Ohio. You want to be in an anime so bad. Here, I'm going to pay you
Here's 25 cents.
Right, exactly. Like that doesn't work either. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it is a case where they're paying these people properly, and that's a whole nother issue there. But it's a little frustrating. And
well, I think it's doubly bad when you mentioned that this show had this big viral following because of the song. So you basically made it a very social thing, and then you took away people's ability to be social about it on your platform. Like, why would you do that?
And the thing is, people are going to find ways to let you know. Like, you can go ahead and take it off your website.
Well, look at any of their posts on X right now. Like,
almost every one of them.
Please bring back comments. Please bring back comments.
Yeah.
How dare you get rid of comments?
Now, I will, on the other side of the issue, because I fair and balanced, I guess you want to say, we were talking off the air. The job I recently left, which I don't want to mention because I don't want to give them any views now that I'm not there anymore. But we used to have a comments and forum section on our website, and right after I started 3 years ago, they got rid of it, mainly because they just couldn't keep up with it. Most of it was spam. So my guess is this is probably first and foremost a budget-saving measure, that whoever the interns were that they were paying a bag of peanuts to monitor this thing, they just let those people go, or, couldn't afford the peanuts anymore. So I think first and foremost, they're cheaping out as a company by getting rid of these. But secondly, because they're also cheaping out as a company by producing subpar releases, this is also a convenient time to get rid of the ability for people to fire back at them when they do something that's crappy.
I mean, it's basically the streaming service equivalent of shrinkflation, right? Like, you're paying the same amount but getting less of a product.
Yeah. And, the other thing we've talked about before, but it really wants you to support, encourages you to support companies like High Dive, who are still kind of the small player in the industry, but they're still getting big shows. Obviously, they have the biggest show of the season, arguably, in Oshi no Ko Season 2, which I watched the first episode of that last week. Second episode's up, and I need to watch it still. But, High Dive did a great job with the subtitles. I know the dub is on the way. It's going to be, I think, a couple weeks after the subtitle version goes up, but they've done a great job. If Crunchyroll's going to go the way of Amazon, where it's like you just don't know what you're going to get, then it's going to be hard as an anime fan to completely phase it out. But I certainly can reduce the amount of shows I watch on there and start supporting other releases if they're going to give me a good product.
What I've realized in the past couple seasons is that I can sit down and just grab an episode of whatever show and start watching it and probably get some enjoyment out of it. I mean, just this season alone, this summer season, I've started Quality Assurance in Another World, which was dubbed the first episode. A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero. First 2 episodes of that were dubbed. Already has 2 dubbed episodes. Crazy.
Yeah.
And then just recently I started watching A Journey Through Another World, Raising Kids While Adventuring, which was subtitled, but still, like, these weren't shows that I set out like, man, I have to watch all of these. These are going to be amazing.
Yeah.
But they were on the service, and, it was something to do while walking on a treadmill, so whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there for sure, and I'm hoping that I don't think Crunchyroll is ever going to bring comments back. I think that ship has sailed. No matter how many people complain, I think that is gone. But
what it tells me is there's probably even more bad decisions looming, and that they just want to get that out of the way now and go wild.
Well, and I think that could be it. And I think, like I said, this show, my dear friend Nokotan, is going to be a real test and see how much they can cheap out on it. And we'll see when episode 2 loads. Like, do they decide to bring these subtitles in-house? Because that's the other thing. We're going to talk a little bit about AI in a moment. Again, I don't know that this was AI, but at the same time, even if you're allowing the Japanese to do this translation, they did a very poor job of it, you're taking work away from American translators who have done great work over the years to translate for subtitles. And now they're losing work to somebody who's doing a crappy job of it very quickly. So
my hope is that this all ends in finding some sort of moderate use of whatever they're doing here, with at least the bare minimum human intervention over here to make sure that it makes sense. Like, don't screw with it, but make it so I can kind of like the panel we watched on subtitling,
yes,
where it's just give me the explanation in small sentences I can read real fast and get the meaning of what's going on.
Yeah, that was still one of the most fascinating panels from Animazement, was kind of understanding how the subtitle game works, and there's an art to it. There's no question about that. But speaking of art, kind of transitioning, I should say, into our next story was actually a video from NHK World's YouTube page, and I'll post that link in the chat, talking about AI in manga translation. And the gist of the story, and I definitely encourage people to check it out. About a 10-minute video, really well done. NHK World does a lot of really cool stuff, both on their YouTube page and on their streaming channel, which you can get.
I was impressed when
website.
The news, like the guy covering the story, just started busting out Mandarin.
Yeah, Japanese, Mandarin, English,
Yeah,
like
that guy was on it.
That's how you work for a company like that, is to be multilingual, and he absolutely nailed it. But it was talking about manga publishers in Japan using AI to be able to translate manga in up to 18 different languages within a few days, as opposed to several weeks of the normal process. And, they talked about the human interaction, as you kind of alluded to with the subtitles, where they still needed humans to check it because Japanese is not the easiest language to translate. And if you just use AI translations, you're going to end up with whatever the pirating sites end up with.
Well, it's going to guess what the subject of sentences are, since it's not readily obvious to a non-human.
Yeah.
And you end up with weird instances where someone is saying, you did this as opposed to I do this. Like, just totally backward.
Yeah. And there's also colloquialisms that didn't come up in the video, but you have phrases in Japanese that don't have a direct English translation. So if you literally translate them, you're going to lose something. Vice versa, you may have some sentence in Japanese that has a very common English phrase that you would use to say the same concept, but the translation machine's not going to find that without having that knowledge. So there are definitely some limitations to it. I'm going to post another video because it completely reminded me of this, and this is another one everybody needs to check out. Of course, I've talked before about how much I enjoy Chris Broad's videos of Broad in Japan. This is one from about 3 years ago where he talks about the dangers of Google Translate when translating Japanese, and he had showed some examples early in the video of some reviews on Google that were left on restaurants talking about different things. And, there are phrases that got translated like the clerk is sticky and
I'll have that.
pig bone day or something like that. Like, there's just these weird literal translations that didn't quite work out. So it was a really fascinating video. And that's the concern with AI, is without human interaction, how do you catch stuff like that? You definitely don't want your clerk getting sticky.
Those
for
kitchens, I mean,
that's very true.
all sorts of nonsense going on. It's everywhere.
But that's the concern. Is can AI get that right? Are you going to keep? Because the thing is, the video very much pitches it like we're going to have people here and they're going to check it over. Well, yes, you're going to do that now.
Yeah.
But at what point do you decide, that's close enough, we're going to fire half of our humans?
Once you think that it's learned enough to do it on its own, you're going to let it do it on its own. And that's just the reality.
And then that's where you start getting into the issues. Because it was interesting that, they had this whole video touting this, and then there was like a 30-second soundbite from the Japanese Association of Translators guy basically saying, we're not really on board with all this because there is some subtle natures of how Japanese translates. So it's an interesting thought. Again, the technology is fascinating, But anytime you've ever used your phone to try to translate a game title, for example, when you go to a convention, like, some of the words it'll get right, and some of it's like, okay, that's not even close. And it's definitely an inexact science for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But interesting. It was a really fascinating video, so definitely check that out. Good stuff there. And again, the Chris Broad video, definitely worth a watch as well. One last kind of main news story before we take a break on the podcast version of this, then we'll get to just some light news stories on the other side of the break. An interesting story from a guy who's been in the industry for a long time, Justin Savakis. He actually had some comments on his X page, his Twitter page, which he goes by the handle at World of Crap.
When I saw that, I first thought, is that really this dude? Like, what kind of tag is that?
Yeah, I guess he's had that forever. But he started Anime News Network. He's worked for Discotech. He's worked for Animigo. He's pretty much done it all in the industry. But basically talking about his experiences from Anime Expo, and just to kind of read his post talking about, I still have 2 meetings to go to this Expo. So far, my takeaways are: 1, anime content bubble is probably going to burst soon. Way too many shows, and nobody can handle it, not fans nor industry. 2, anime merch sales have fallen off a cliff, especially figures. Everyone's kind of, and then just like straight-faced emoji. But obviously, somebody suggested, are we headed towards another 2007? And he said, it looks different, although both were heavily caused by macroeconomic conditions, to be honest. And obviously, that is always the overarching thing when we're talking about this stuff is the economy of everything. And I know you can get into talking about inflation and stuff like that, but the biggest reality right now, even more so than inflation, is the fact that the yen is really in the tank.
Yeah.
So shows that are making yen are making crap, whereas things that are making dollars are doing really well compared to the yen. So that's kind of the bigger picture there. But there are a ton of shows. We talk about it all the time when we watch the Daytona videos of all the opening themes from this season, and there's like 100.
Too many.
There are 100 songs in there. It's like there can't be that many shows. And there's no way anybody can watch all of those shows. And there's no way that you can produce that many shows, even with all these studios, and have some sort of maintained quality standard across those shows. So it's an interesting thought, because it does kind of feel like we're headed toward another, maybe not the same way, but at some point something's got to give.
Well, I think even he alludes to the fact that he could see there potentially being half as many shows a season, which, if that were the case, most people wouldn't even notice, because there are so many shows. Like, you wouldn't feel like there was any kind of like crunch in the actual industry. But I gotta think too, I mean, the yen situation is one thing, but I think it's probably kind of similar to the gaming industry, where I think, and even like some of the streaming services over here and the money they've been spending on movies and television production, I think they thought that the business they were doing during COVID wasn't a short-term thing, and that was just going to continue indefinitely, and they were just going to keep raking in money, and they could keep spending money. And I just think, certainly coming out of the COVID issue, people didn't have the same kind of appetite to sit at home and watch and consume.
Yeah, because I think the first thing everybody did when all these like restrictions were lifted was get outside, go on trips. Like, even with inflation, like, people were still vacationing, people were still traveling. Like, people don't want to sit at home in front of the television. And I mean, we're seeing that in, kind of the crossover. We talk about it a lot with wrestling ratings. We're seeing ratings overall down because the number of households that have these channels are down. And I think I mentioned ESPN is down. I want to say it's just under 70 million viewers now. And at one point it was, I think, up to or over 100 million households had ESPN. So, these people, when they talk about cutting the cord, they're cutting the cord off, the power off their television. Yeah. They're not even watching TV anymore. So much of the TV you watch is through your computer or through your phone. So, yeah, at some point, you can't just keep producing this without eventually the crap hitting the fan.
And I wonder, too, because he also mentions merch sales kind of hitting the rock bottom, essentially. And I just think there's now like a lack of perceived quality in a lot of this stuff. I think even watching some of the shows last season, I was just like, I don't feel like they put a lot of money into this. And I don't know if that's just a matter of Sony and Crunchyroll and Disney Plus and all of them are like, hey, we need more content. Just keep it coming. I don't care how little you spend on it. And you kind of see it now in these issues with translations and subtitles where it's like, I just need more stuff. I don't care how much effort or how much money goes into it. Just bring it here.
Well, and I can relate directly because this is exactly what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years in college sports, where and sports in general. I shouldn't just say college sports. That's where it most affects me. But it started with ESPN. It said, we're adding ESPN3. We want your streaming rights. So we can stream all your sports on ESPN3. Now we have ESPN Plus. We're going to pay people for it. We need you to produce Horizon League basketball games and Horizon League soccer matches because we need content to fill this. And we're going to, get the third division Turkish soccer league on ESPN Plus because
more competitive than you think.
There's 8 people out there that want to watch it, and they'll pay the $6 a month, $9 a month, whatever it's going to end up being to watch it. So, and now, of course, you have all these. You have Paramount Plus. You have, whatever. You've got all these now streaming services, Peacock, where they're bidding on these leagues now because it's content and it allows them to raise the price. So there's content overflow everywhere now, and anime is certainly an example of that. Where you're right, it's just like we need shows. I don't care how crappy they are. And the other thing too, I remember when we first started going to anime conventions, we talk about why this show was made or why that show was made. What did they always tell us? These shows were made to sell merch.
Yeah,
that's it. They've got fancy uniforms. They got giant robots.
Even going back to our childhood, all the 80s cartoons, like, Transformers existed to sell toys. G.I. Joe existed to sell toys. That was just what they were made for.
And it's like, I watch so many shows now that it's like, there's never going to be any merch made of this. That was never even considered when they made this show. So the revenue stream window for this show is so small that there's just no way that they could have made any money off of it. Whatever you spent on animation and production, there's nothing beyond that. A lot of these other shows back before you had this bubble, the whole point was we're still selling toys on a lot of these shows years and years and years later. And a story we're going to get to after the break, talking about some new shows and new old shows that are going to be new shows again. Yeah. Is this thought that as the market constricts, and we saw it in movies a few years ago, where the market constricts, and we're bringing Ghostbusters back.
Yeah.
We're bringing, we're going to make 20 Marvel movies, and we're going to use the same characters throughout. We're going to make, it's.
I mean, they're making a new Shrek movie now, right?
Making a new Shrek movie. It's find what has sold, and let's just beat it to death because we know people will see the name and they'll go watch it. It's harder to take that risk on something that's outside of the box. And I think in anime, it might not always necessarily be, well, this old show was really popular, let's bring it back. But it's going to be, the manga artist who did Kaguya-sama is like, oh, he's got Oshi no Ko. Well, Kaguya-sama was a huge hit. Well, let's bring Oshi no Ko in. Okay, what are you doing next? All right, well, let's take this next. It becomes this pipeline where you're just taking these same. I mean, Hunter x Hunter is a perfect example. Hey, Yu Yu Hakusho was great. What else you got for us? Oh, Hunter x Hunter, that's awesome too. Okay, what follows that? It becomes this pipeline where you just
nothing follows.
As it turns out, nothing follows it. But you get these manga artists who do such a great job in coming up with stories, and then it's like, how do we continue to capitalize on that? So. It's interesting. It's something we're going to have to keep an eye on for sure. It'll be interesting because obviously AX was still widely attended, and I don't know what the attendance numbers ended up being. So convention attendance still up, but
those trips are more expensive now.
Yeah, well, no question.
So if you're worried about merch sales, like I don't know how much expendable income people have after their hotel rooms and Anime X attendance. I just think. That could be part of the problem, too.
I attended Anime Expo 11 years ago, just had all the memories pop up on my Facebook over the past week, which I would love to go back to Anime Expo. I love the trip out there, and it's a really neat event. But during that trip, and obviously I wasn't making quite the money that I'm making now, but at the same time, one day I walked from the convention center to a grocery store to buy, bread and tuna so I could have a couple of just tuna sandwich meals in my hotel room to save money on meals because there were no cheap meals out there. I had Johnny Rockets the one day that was probably $20. I ate the ESPN Zone when it was still open in LA. That
Classic.
But it's like nothing is cheap. The flight's not going to be cheap. The hotel's not going to be cheap. Even the admission is not cheap. And then that's before you ever spend anything on merch. So it's, that's another thing to keep in mind is that the trip itself means you don't have as much money to buy those figures. You don't have as much money to buy even the physical releases. So at some point, something's got to
get physical releases.
Yeah, well, though, if you can find them. Thank you, Discotac, for continuing to do physical releases. So, again, some good news, some not so good news, but we cover all the news here on Anime Thursdays here on the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to step aside if you're listening on the podcast version of this. When we come back on the other side of this timeout, we're going to just hit some highlights of some news stories that have come out over the past few weeks, including a couple of new seasons of shows and a couple of old shows getting new seasons. We'll talk about that on the other side of this timeout here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, live on Twitch, as we are almost every Thursday. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We appreciate everybody tuning in, and of course, you can check out our website. Of course, you've got our store there. You've got previous editions of the Nerdcast Empire. We're on the move to 50 followers on Twitch, so please, if you drop by, even if you drop by the VOD, drop us a follow. We're headed toward 50. That's our first goal. We really appreciate everybody that's followed, everybody that tunes in, whether it's live or on the VOD. Numbers have been really nice. We really do appreciate it. It's been awesome. Coming up on Sunday, that's our next podcast. We are back for another episode of Music Weekly. We are on to the music of June the 28th this week, I believe.
Yes.
Is that correct? June 28th. So always interesting to see what the list that you put together has cooked up for us this week. So should be fun. There was definitely some wild choices last week as far as just the variation, the variety of content. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, you can go back and do that. But join us again, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday night for another episode of Music Weekly. And then we'll be back next week for another episode of Anime Thursdays. It's time to go back into the music. So Mike and I are each going to pick 5 anime themes that you need to check out. We'll use some theme or we won't. Who knows? But we'll try to get them through the censors. But the best bet is to join us live if you want to hear the music. That'll be 7 o'clock next Thursday night here on the Nerdcast Empire. Let's just get through some smaller news stories to kind of wrap up this week on the Nerdcast Empire. A couple shows getting new seasons, and the first one I just have to start out with because I'm still mad at the Peggies for this. For getting me into this show. I still blame them for that. But Rent a Girlfriend is getting a 4th season for some reason. That's literally how I wrote it on my sheet. I think there are some people excited for that. Supposedly season 3 was better. I have not yet. I've watched like one episode of season 3. I just haven't had the time or desire to go back and watch the rest of it. I probably will. But season 4 is coming up, and evidently there's certain episodes that are going to be in this that people are both horrified and excited for. Somebody on a Reddit thread today compared it to like what would happen if 9/11 and Christmas fell on the same day. So that is a heck of a statement to make. So it should be very interesting. But season 4 coming up. We'll see what that ends up holding. Now, a show that I know you'll be more interested in is Fire Force is getting a 3rd season. I know you've checked out at least some, or are you caught up on that? I can't remember where
I'm
you're
caught
at.
up on that one.
So your thoughts on Fire Force getting a 3rd season?
Yeah, definitely excited for that. Can't wait to see where it's going to go from here. And supposedly it's connected to Okubo's other work, Soul Eater. So I don't know if by the end of Fire Force you'll kind of see how the two are related to each other. Also kind of found it interesting. I didn't realize that he also did character designs on the Bravely Default video game series.
Oh, interesting.
Dude's got a really interesting, different style. So, yeah, definitely looking forward to the next season of Fire Force.
Yeah, if you've seen any of his work, you can definitely tell how related they are. So that's really interesting. But for Fire Force fans, some really good news with a new season coming out 2025. Also in 2025, we're going to get a band reunion, Aqua Times, who has done music for Bleach, Naruto Shippuden, Gintama, several other shows as well. They're getting back together. Evidently, they broke up in 2018, had their final tour that ended in September 2018. But they have announced that for their 20th anniversary, they're going to be getting back together. We'll be starting band activities in 2025, including a new single and a live concert. So always great when bands that have had a lot of success get back together. I kind of went through because it's like I knew their name. But I did recognize a few of their songs kind of when I went through. But I mean, those guys seem pretty solid. This should be pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, I do recall the song from Bleach. That's really about it for them. But yeah, I mean, hopefully maybe they'll stick around long enough to maybe do the convention circuit over here. That would be really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of what I always hope for with these bands, that especially for a show that was as big in the West as Bleach, that I think a lot of people would love. You know, after seeing Rookies as Punked come over here, and that was so much fun. And of course, they came back to New York this year. I think any chance like that a band gets to come over here and kind of let the fans over here appreciate that they're back together. Still holding out hope for Siam Shade someday.
That would be awesome.
Like, I know they got back together and then kind of stopped again. Like, can we get back together for one good U.S. tour? I would get on a plane to go see those guys live. But really good stuff. So congratulations to fans of Aqua Times. They're going to be getting back together, and we'll keep you updated if they end up doing any music for a new anime, which could certainly be a possibility. We'll finish today with a couple of new anime projects for classic shows, and one that I think we mentioned last time, because I just want to mention it because it's close enough in time, but I think we mentioned it a couple weeks ago, was Ranma 1/2 that is getting a new anime, which I think people are really excited for. The second Rumiko Takahashi work to get a revamp, although I guess Yashahime sort of kind of is a newer version of Inuyasha, but
certainly a continuation of the story.
Yeah, but obviously you had Urusei Yatsura, which seems to be well received, and now Ranma 1/2. But the two that were announced over the last couple weeks since we've been on, first was Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha is getting a 20th anniversary project with a TV version of the first two films, which is really interesting, especially because Discotek is currently releasing Nanoha. I have the first season and a couple of the movies over here that I bought when we went to Animazement that I have yet to open and watch, but I will get to those. That's a show that was kind of out of print forever, and it finally came back into print. Discotek again coming to the rescue, and now we're going to get a movie, so that's really exciting. Kind of interested to see what kind of goes into that and whether it spurs on maybe a new season of the anime. I'm not sure if the story allows for that. The other one that may be more excited about is Magic Knight Rayearth is getting a new animation project. Did not reveal exactly what the form of that was going to be. They did have a video, which was really cool. The new looking version of that show. Of course, it ran 94 to 95. It's definitely a show that is in an era that the animation, I don't want to say it doesn't hold up, because it does, but at the same time, like, getting a new coat of paint on it, making it look modern with the HD and all that, but also keeping the same art style. Obviously, Clamp, they're so good. I know they'll do a great job with this, but it's really interesting to see these shows, and this kind of goes back to the conversation we had before the break. You're seeing these AAA titles that are getting new productions. And of course, one that I didn't put this news story in, but the trailer is now out for the first episodes of the Kyoto arc of the new Rurouni Kenshin. That's another example of a AAA title that got a new release.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is going to be the trend, because these studios are only going to take chances on these big name titles rather than running the risk of spending a bunch of money on something that doesn't pan out.
Yeah, it's kind of troubling in a way, because I feel like a lot of the attractiveness of the manga and anime industry is that there's always something new on the horizon. You're not relying on the same IPs over and over again, and I think that's over here in the West. There's a problem with that, where they seem unable to get new properties over as much. You look at like comic books, it's always the same characters. You look at movies, it's a lot of the same regurgitated stuff over and over again. I don't want to see that be the case with anime. I mean, I know you do have some of the legacy characters that are still present, but not to the same extent. And I think when I look at all the new shows I've watched over the years, it's like, I don't want to think that that's not going to continue. Like, I don't want to think that something like a Shangri-La Frontier isn't going to be made, or Solo Leveling, so they can create more Inuyasha or more, Rayearth or Nanoha. Like, I think it's great in a way that these happen, because I think it can bring a new audience to a property that maybe wouldn't watch it due to it looking dated as far as the original goes. But I think you want to be careful that they don't just totally go all in on reboots and remakes at the expense of creative new endeavors.
Yeah, I hope a lot of these shows don't go the way of a lot of the music that we check out each and every Sunday, where it's like these bands should still be on the radio. These bands should be popular. We shouldn't have to go to this effort to try to find these bands. I hope that that's not what a lot of these anime become, where it's like, oh, that didn't even get licensed. Like, we're going to have to, like, sail the seven seas to find this show that seems like it'd be really cool. My hope is that it really is simply, let's put a new version of this out that people can appreciate in the highest quality form. And if it ends up being something that makes us a crap load of money, we can then take some of that money and make these other shows that maybe aren't going to have the merch. Maybe they're not going to have the initial following, so that we can absorb some of those early losses to tell a good story. I hope is that is the game plan, not let's just reboot everything.
And I think they at least have one thing going for them that you don't see over here as much, and that's there's always that next new big hit. It's, just looking at the monitor over there, like My Hero Academia, over here that wouldn't have been made. They would have just made another version of the Avengers or X-Men or something. Like, there's still plenty of new hot properties that come out on a regular basis, so I hope that continues.
And I think it will, at least for a while. I think I would agree with Justin Zemeckis' thought that maybe we trim it down to 50 a season instead of 100 a season.
As a fan, I think there are too many shows.
Yeah, 100%. There's just not enough time. I couldn't imagine if your only job was to review anime, and that's just all, because you would just be watching it 24 hours a day, because there's just no other way to get through all this.
And honestly, there are tons of shows from the 90s, the aughts and 2010s that I've not gotten around to. So if maybe for a while
all this stuff
slate
here
of seasonal anime were to deplete a bit, that probably wouldn't be the worst thing.
Yeah, I mean, just physical releases alone. I've got all this stuff behind you, which a lot of it I've not watched. I've got a whole bunch of stuff in my room that I have not watched, on top of stuff that's just streaming that I still haven't watched, that I haven't gotten around to, or I've started and not finished. Like, there's a ton of that stuff. I guess the question is, and not that we're encouraging them to continue to do reboots, but what's next? What is that show that is out there from the 80s or 90s?
Well, I think that could be a topic for a later episode of what are your top 3 things that need to be redone or revived.
Yeah, because I think there are some shows from that era that, are just, they just look dated. And people who watch the original, and I think people who could go back and watch it will enjoy it. But to get a casual person into it is going to be harder, because it's like, they go from watching all this beautiful HD 4K animation to something that looks like it was animated on a toaster. Like, it's just not the same thing. But again, because anime is so story driven, you hope that people will still appreciate the classics, even if they don't look quite as good.
I think the bad thing is there are things from the early 2000s that actually look worse than maybe some of the remasters of things from the 70s, where it's just something about the animation at that point in time. It's like the equivalent of comparing a Super Nintendo game to a PlayStation 1 game. It's because of the type of graphics that somehow now looks worse than the Super Nintendo game.
Well, I think the reason's pretty easy, is that you can go back and reshoot cell-based animation. You can clean up the artifacts. You can all the things that make it look really bad. Most of those things, as long as the masters are still around, as long as the animation cells are still around, in a lot of cases they are, because the Japanese, especially your big shows, your Gundams and stuff like that, where they for certain saved all that stuff. It's really easy to get back in there and put them in there and digitize it all and have it come out looking pretty good. If it's crappy CGI from the early 2000s,
it's a lost cause.
You just can't do anything with that, short of, Chris just mentioned the same thing. Like, there's just not much you can do with that. And I even think, as an example, like, because as a fan of Love Live, the original Love Live series, which came out in 2015, I think, the dance sequences and the songs were all like CGI, and it's first creepy because it's like everybody moves the same way, and it's like, it shouldn't be that perfect. It's a little creepy, but it's like, it's not great. in the latest seasons, like they've done a much better job of making that look like the rest of the show. Like it's not this jarring thing that is thrown into the middle, and that's 2015.
Yeah.
Like that's not even something that's from the early 2000s. And I think of a show like was it Nadesco that used Lost Universe. Lost Universe used like a CGI open at one point on like the Western release, and it just looked bad, especially because the rest of the show looks like Slayers.
Yeah, I think Soul Hunter did something as well. It looked really bad for the time.
It's like, it was especially bad because in a lot of cases it was mixed in with cell-based animation, so it really stood out like a sore thumb. And I know you've gone through and a good time to plug your anime channel, because your channel with all the opens, you can go back and watch one of your videos, which we're going to do again in a couple weeks, but like the 2001, 2002, like you'll see the whole gamut.
Some of those are rough looking.
Yeah, like you see the stuff that looks, okay, that looks pretty good, and then it's like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, and that was passing as cutting edge in 2001. It's like, oh my gosh, like, I'm glad that
it's
era.
like they took away all of the charm of the 90s style and replaced it with something that was just going to rot immediately.
And it's funny because that was the way they started ramping up the production in the early 2000s. Yeah. We're going to throw this CGI in here and basically make the audience kind of accept it so we can continue to produce stuff faster, because it was starting to ramp up in the West with Dragon Ball and Pokemon and all that. So now that was the first ramp up of content. Now we're getting cases where, as we talked about, there's anime being made all over the world. Wonder Egg Priority had anime done here in the U.S. You had that show we talked about a couple weeks ago with animation possibly done in North Korea.
Yeah, whoops.
Like, it's being done everywhere. It's being done for next to no money. So you have these animators who are overworked and underpaid doing stuff as fast as they can get it out because it's got to be done. So that's where, going back to the story before the break, that's where something has to give eventually.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, what goes out is going to be crappy, and then you could hurt the whole industry by having, if your releases become more crappy than good, then you've got a real problem.
Well, I think you've seen it over here, too, with some of the strikes that we've had in the entertainment industry, where it's like, the result of this ultimately is that the industry is going to shrink. Like, you're not going to be able to pay out the kind of money that you all want because no one's making it. Like, I think so many of the figures have been misleading as far as what they're making off of these streaming shows. It's it's going to come back to bite you.
Well, and how quickly was it as soon as the last strike ended that all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, what's this AI clause in here? What is all this? And man, you talk about the uproar online, especially voice actors talking about AI, and it's like, your union negotiated that because, again, that was the trade-off. Oh, you're going to give you more money for this? Well, we're going to save money here, and this is how we're going to do it. And the unions are like, okay, we can accept that trade-off. And then when they got the fine print, it was like...
It's sad because the people on top aren't going to be affected by that. It's the people who are just doing very small-time gigs and going from gig to gig trying to make ends meet. Like, those are the people who ultimately will suffer at the end of the day. They were probably some of the most fervent in support of everything that was happening.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it works. Unfortunately, it's always the little guy that gets hurt in the end. The big guy always finds a way to make sure he gets his or hers, and everybody else is just kind of left over. So... Not to end on a down note today, but again, it's just an interesting time in the anime industry, and certainly something we'll continue to cover. Certainly keep an eye on some of these new shows that are coming out, so it'll be really interesting to see. And there's some really good stuff this season. We've both started some shows. Like I said, you mentioned a couple shows you watched.
Yeah.
I watched the first episode of Oshinoko, which I'm really, really excited for. Really hope that show pans out. Because like I said, the last time there was like a big show that I kind of got on board with was Wonder Egg Priority. And I'm still mad about that one because, man, that had the chance to be an all-timer, and it just like they just fell off the cliff with that one. So I would presume this one will not. Much better manga. I mean, it has a manga, first off, and it has a manga artist, so that I like his work. So I'm really hoping that... hopefully it'll continue, but yeah.
It's kind of funny as you start watching things more seasonally, which I have in the past couple seasons, just how many recurring themes or slight alterations to themes you get. The Journey Through Another World, Raising Kids While Adventuring, is like Konosuba in a way, where like only instead of a goddess, the main character dies and meets this god who sends him to this world. But in this case, the god was actually the one that killed him accidentally. And but still, this dude ends up meddling with this guy's life moving forward, and now he's got these overpowered kids that he's adventuring with. What was the other one? Quality Assurance in Another World was a weird one. The explanation of the show kind of made it seem kind of vague as far as there's something more going on here. Well, you find out at the end of the first episode, spoiler alert, I suppose, is that the main character, the guy who's one of the quality assurance people, the reason he is that is because he's basically a bug tester in a video game, which they don't tell you until right at the end of the episode that, oh, wait, this is all a video game. Like, the little girl that you meet at the beginning, she is just an NPC, essentially. But it's just... Apparently now he's stuck in this game with several other bug testers, and they're trying. He just keeps completing his bug reports, thinking eventually he'll make it out of the world. I guess the other characters you're going to meet along the way have kind of went into debug mode and started acting ridiculous. So could be interesting to see where that one goes. But still, you kind of have the same themes, just with a slight twist on it.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see where those go. And as we get through the weeks, we'll talk more about the shows we're watching during the summer, and hopefully I'll get to a few more. Maybe I'll get finished my spring shows here before too long as well. But a lot of good stuff, and we're still kind of in this dead period of the calendar with our next convention coming up at the end of August when we head back to Columbus finally. We're really excited for that. It's MatsuriCon, and since we didn't get OhioCon.
It is the Columbus Anime Convention.
It is the only one, unless you believe that really sketchy-looking OhioCon website, which...
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, we'll have to get an update on that for the next time we do Anime Thursdays and see if any movement has happened on the OhioCon front. But I believe that is going to wrap things up for this week's edition of Anime Thursdays on the Nerdcast Empire. Really good stuff. Again, a lot of news this week, very news heavy. We appreciate everybody stopping by. Appreciate Chris holding down the chat as always. Next week, again, we're going to be talking anime music. We'll do our best to try to get it through on the VOD, but you really want to be here live next Thursday, 7, if you definitely want to hear the music, because there's never a guarantee with anime music and the VOD whether it's going to make it through. So make sure you join us next week, and don't forget to join us on Sunday for another episode of Music Weekly with the music of June the 28th. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike for joining me in the studio. And a big thanks to everyone for following. Again, drop us a follow if you haven't already. We're on our way to 50 followers. We'd appreciate each and every follow. And we, of course, appreciate everybody who has checked out our work so far. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.